Ramy Ashour is widely regarded as the best modern squash player, if not the GOAT of the entire sport. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the racket that he used for a large portion of his career to see if it really is the magic wand that he made it look like. I should say that Ramy used multiple different rackets throughout his career, from Head to Dunlop to Prince, but the reason that the Prince Airstick 130 is so iconic is because he used it for some of the greatest moments and matches in squash history. Most notably his matches against Mohamed El-Shorbagy in the 2014 World Championship final. As well as the 2015 final in El Gouna. And to top it off, the unbelievable rally against Gregory Gaultier in the final of the Tournament of Champions in 2013. As with previous reviews, I'll be judging it based on 5 criteria: power, control, feel, manoeuvrability, and looks. Each criteria will be rated out of 10 at the end of the video. Just to clarify what each means, power is all about how hard you can hit the ball and how effortless it is to hit with pace. Control is about how easy it is to hit the exact target you want consistently, as well as how precise and stable it is when hitting a static ball. Feel is about how the ball reacts off of the strings and how much ability you have to influence what the ball does. Manoeuvrability is about how easy it is to handle and move through the air. This can affect racket head speed and racket preparation and will typically impact volleys and balls around the back of the service box. Looks is my personal opinion of how appealing the racket is aesthetically. I should also mention before we start that my quality of hitting may not be as sharp as in previous videos. This is nothing to do with the performance of the racket, it's more to do with the fact that my arm is injured, so I'm slightly limited and can't get the same racket head speed as normal, particularly on the backhand. I've had plenty of unrecorded hits with this racket previously though, so my opinions of it aren't affected by this session alone. My initial thoughts when hitting with this racket is how there's actually more weight in the head than I expected. It's actually bordering on being slightly head heavy, which makes it even more impressive that Ramy was able to have such fast hands and generate so much racket head speed from a short swing. For the first main test, I tried hitting fast straight volleys to get an idea of the racket's power and manoeuvrability. It was somewhat difficult because I didn't want to break the racket on the sideball, as apparently they're quite fragile and it would be very hard to get a new one due to their rarity. This meant I had to be careful not to hit too tight, as then there'll be risk of breakage. As for the performance, it seemed to shine in this area of the court, as it felt like it was designed to be used with high racket head speed and pace. The ball comes off the strings quite quickly and effortlessly, which allows you to keep the ball nice and tight without clipping the sideball most of the time. This also works very nicely when straightening up on the volley off of a cross court, which is something Ramy did exceptionally well. The times I did clip the sideball were if I didn't get the racket head through the ball fast enough, but that's mostly down to my dodgy arm and possibly a tiny bit down to the slight bit of extra weight in the racket head that requires a bit more sharpness and snap to harness. Nothing major that a bit more time playing with it wouldn't solve though. It also seemed to work nicely for an attacking volley kill or aggressive volley to the back, as the ball comes off the strings extremely quickly, as well as the racket remaining very stable in these positions. As well as this, it feels very easy to get pace and attack balls that are high up, which would explain why Ramy enjoyed using this racket, as he was probably the best ever at attacking from the high backhand. Next, I moved on to the short balls, starting with easy ones on the bounce to get an idea of the overall feel of the racket. Compared to other Prince rackets I've tried, it feels much better taking the ball in short, as there's a slight bit of feedback and bite on the ball that others lack. Teardrop rackets with a fan stringing pattern can often lack that feel, and while this definitely doesn't feel as good as some traditional head-shaped rackets in this department, for what it is, it's pretty good, especially since it can generate more power than most of those other rackets. I definitely felt as if the racket really wants to inject pace into the ball, and most of my better short shots were when I used more racket head speed and stunned it into the front with a slightly flatter racket face, rather than a soft cut drop. Something I find interesting about this racket is that I don't believe it was ever a top of the range model and had less technology in than most of their other rackets like the Speedport range. However, this is what made it feel so great, as it gave it a bit more of a raw and natural feeling without anything getting in the way. For the volley short balls, I started off trying to take the pace off of the ball and cut them in. These felt good, but it felt like the racket would rather redirect a ball with pace rather than take the pace off it. This isn't a negative at all, as redirecting a fast ball into the space can apply an unbelievable amount of pressure to an opponent, as it gives them almost no time to recover. Once I did start taking it in with more pace, the racket really came alive and it felt like it would never miss a target with that approach. It is worth noting that strings play a major part in a racket's feel. I believe this one was strung by the previous owner with old Technofiber 305 Plus, and it would probably have a bit more feel and bite if it was strung with fresh Technofiber 305. The final test was on the consistency of the straight drives. These felt really good as the bit of weight in the head allowed nice heavy hit lengths and got the ball running through nicely. I wouldn't say they were quite as consistently accurate as, again, some of the best traditional head-shaped rackets, but that could easily be because I was wary of breaking it whenever the ball was tight. Generally, it felt a bit better hitting a slightly flatter ball, like with the short balls, but that is quite typical of a fan-shaped stringing pattern from my experience. Normally I would test it out in a few matches for the review, but for this racket, I don't want to risk breaking it, so I'm sticking to just the solo test for this one. Now, before we continue with the video, please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Now, let's get to the ratings. For the power, I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. Now, you're not going to get many rackets with more power than this one, especially since you've got the combination of being slightly head heavy, being a teardrop shape, and having the fan-shaped stringing pattern to lengthen the main strings. All of those things combined means it's gonna have a lot of power. You might get a few rackets that are even more head heavy that will have a bit more power than that, but realistically they're few and far between. So in the power department, this is definitely right up there. For control, I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10, which may sound a bit low, but in reality it's still pretty good for me. I'm quite harsh on these things. I like to nitpick, otherwise you can't really trust the ratings, so I've got to say it how it is. For the same reasons that it's powerful, it loses those points on control, really. I find that teardrop shapes tend to not quite have that same precision that the traditional head shapes have. So it's no fault of the racket itself, it's just you have to lose out somewhere. A racket can't be good at everything. As we found out on my previous review of the Dunlop FX 128 Pro, where it had unbelievable power and control, but its maneuverability was horrendous because it was so head heavy. You can't win out everywhere. The link to that video is up in the top corner. I think it's that side. Who knows? It might be there. You'll see. Now, for the feel, I'm going to go down a similar theme to the control, and it's going to be a 7.5 out of 10 for similar reasons, really. I've always found that the fan-shaped stringing pattern, it always lacks a little bit of bite on the ball. I don't know if that's because of just the way the strings are lined up. When you come down the back of the ball, it doesn't quite get fully around it, if that makes sense. Like, you're going to get more power with it, but you are going to lack that feel. Now, compared to other Prince rackets, it actually, as I mentioned before, how it feels a bit more raw, feels a bit more natural. You do get a lot more feel on the ball than with other Prince rackets, particularly the ones that had those O-rings, so like the Speedport series and those ones. I always found they felt like hitting the ball with a block of wood. You got nothing, no feedback. And some people like that. You've had a lot of successful players use those rackets, and some of them are some of the best shot players ever, like James Willstrop for a long period used that type of racket, used the Speedport Black and the ones that followed. But for me, I like that little bit of feedback. I like to feel when you've hit the ball. I like feeling you cut down the back of the ball. And this racket, you can feel it a bit. But again, if there are a few traditional head-shaped rackets out there that really excel in this department. For example, the one I used, the Dunlop Sonic Core Elite, feels fantastic in those situations. Now, I will say, if this was strung with 305 rather than 305 plus, and it was freshly strung, a bit tighter probably, you'd probably get a decent amount more feel, and you might even push it up to 8.5 score. But I can only rate it based on what I've experienced with it. But I can imagine that going up in that situation. Now, for the maneuverability, I'm going to rate it 7 out of 10. For this one, I was expecting it to be higher going in, like I said at the start. But the fact of the matter is, there is a bit of weight in the head, which does give it good power and good stability. But it does mean that from a maneuverability standpoint, it's not quite as good as some other rackets. And I found that my arm got a little bit tired. It could be partly the injury didn't help, but I think they both contributed towards my arm starting to wear out a little bit by the end. It's not very head heavy, it's just a tiny bit, and generally I like a headlight racket, although the Sonic Core Elite has a little bit of weight in the head, but it's probably a bit more even. I would say this goes slightly more towards the head heavy route than an even balance. It's not. It still feels good. It doesn't. It's not an overwhelming difference to what I'm used to, but it was against the expectations that I had, and I thought it was going to be like some sort of feather. The way Ramy wields it makes it seem like some sort of magic wand that you can get some insane racket head speed with. But the truth is, that's just him being unbelievable, it turns out. And I don't think, I'm pretty sure that he does use, or did use, the stock version of it, based on stories that I've heard. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe he wasn't using a custom one, because I heard a story where he bought a load of them at the end. So yeah, now we move on to looks, and people might hate me for this, but I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Anyone that says it's higher than that, I think, is just looking back in a nostalgic way, because it's not a bad looking racket, but it's not the best color ever, and it's not fantastic looking. It looks great because you imagine it in Ramy's hand, and Ramy made it look amazing. But if you look at it from a purely objective standpoint, it doesn't really look that special. If you were told that there's just some rubbish racket that no one's ever used, you wouldn't think, oh, that looks like some really stylish racket that you really need. So yeah, I like the look of it, and if I were rating it based on how much I like a racket, I'd rate it higher, because I'm a massive fan of Ramy. I watched those years of squash very closely. I remember Curtis Malik, so this is a throwback. He used to use this racket as a junior for a couple of years when we played in the under 13s, under 11s sort of age groups. So I remember it being on the receiving end of some of those nicks that Curtis used to hit. So yeah, I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 for looks. The most important question is, would I use this racket in a tournament and feel like I could perform well? And the answer is yes. The scores may seem on the lower side, but as a complete package, it feels fantastic and just requires you to play in a certain way that suits the racket. I feel it does suit quite an aggressive style of play, with someone looking to cut off and straighten a lot of balls on the volley, while also hitting quite flat and direct to the front and back corners. Obviously, before anyone says that Ramy used more variation than anyone and could soften a ball unbelievably well and cut down on the ball perfectly too, I know the racket is perfectly fine for all of that. It's just better suited to and easier to execute the other type of shot as mentioned before. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video. It would be great if you could like and subscribe to the channel so you can see my next upload, and I've got a special treat for my next racket review. See you next time.